Hello and welcome everyone for tonight's presentation. Thank you very much for joining us, and we will begin shortly. Hello and welcome to tonight's Zoom webinar hosted by the Northeast Ohio Regional Sewer District. My name is Jen Elting and I will be your moderator tonight. This presentation, Shaker Lakes Review and Recommendations, features Frank Greenland, the Sewer District's Director of Watershed Programs. We are also joined by some other Sewer District colleagues, as well as representatives from Cleveland Heights and Shaker Heights who are available to answer any community-specific questions if they arise. I would like to welcome from Shaker Heights, Mayor David Weiss, several City Council members, Chief Administrative Officer Jerry Chaikin, and Director of Public Works, Patty Spees. From Cleveland Heights, we welcome Director of Public Works, Colette Klinkscale. If you have a question for either Frank Greenland or any of the other representatives on tonight's webinar, please post your question on Zoom's Q&A feature, and I will address the question to our presenter. I will also keep a watchful eye on the chat box and look for questions there as well. We are recording this presentation and it will be posted to our website, neorsd.org/Shaker Lakes. We will use this website as our project update page, and information will be posted there as it becomes available. If you have any questions, please post them to the Zoom Q&A feature. If you think of any questions after tonight's meeting, please send them to me at askus@neorsd.org. I will also add the dedicated URL and email address to the chat for your reference. And thank you again for joining us. And I welcome to our virtual public meeting, Frank Greenland, Director of Watershed Programs with the Northeast Ohio Regional Sewer District for tonight's webinar, Shaker Lakes Review and Recommendations. Frank, the floor is yours.
Okay, good evening, everyone. I want to thank everyone for attending tonight's presentation. We're going to give an overview on an extensive study that we have conducted throughout the entire Shaker Lakes watershed, the Doan Brook watershed, and we're really going to focus on Shaker Lakes today, our findings and recommendations. Okay, here we go with the presentation, and this is what I want to discuss today. We're going to talk about the sewer district's role in regional stormwater management. We'll talk a little bit about the Shaker Lakes, their history, and their current conditions. There are numerous roles and responsibilities amongst different entities, and we'll talk about those briefly. And then I want to get into the study we've conducted and the findings and recommendations we're putting forth today. We will open it up at the end for discussion. And again, I thank everyone for coming today. First, let's talk about the sewer district and its regional stormwater management program. This map highlighted in green are the areas that send wastewater to one of our 3 wastewater treatment plants. Outlined in black on the periphery is the boundary of the regional stormwater management program area. And the differences, there are a few slight differences in Olmsted Township. The northern half of Olmsted Township is served wastewater by the city of North Olmsted. We do not serve them. They asked for full inclusion in the district's stormwater management program. And the same thing happened in North Royalton. We only serve a small corner, the northeast corner. On the wastewater side, we serve them in their entirety on the stormwater side. And all of those blue lines, those streams, are the network of what we call the regional stormwater system. So under this program, we are collecting revenue to solve problems. So these problems are typically flooding, neighborhoods, streets, structures, erosion along stream banks, and the erosion problems are very pervasive across all of the watersheds of Northeast Ohio. And water quality considerations are always in our mind. And as we evaluate alternatives and look for good solutions, we want good environmental solutions. And the safety element in stormwater management is really important. When we talk safety, we're talking about public safety and the mitigation of risk that flooding and other types of stormwater management issues pose to the public. This is a picture of the lower lakes, the old stone grist mill that was constructed a long time ago along Lower Lake. This was the North Union Shaker settlement. These types of facilities, dams across the nation, including Doan Brook, were typically dammed for commerce, not for stormwater management, for commerce. And in this case, two different mills were constructed. The dams were formed first in 1826 to power a mill that formed Lower Shaker Lake. Next, in 1852, a new mill necessitated the damming of Doan Brook again, and that formed Horseshoe Lake. The North Union Shakers disbanded in 1889, so that commerce function essentially went away, but two lakes were left behind. So these dams are incredibly old, 195 years at Lower, 170 at Horseshoe. So this is very old, and in typical engineering practice, this is typically beyond useful life of facility. So these dams certainly are not up to code with today's standards, and we evaluated that as we worked through our study. There are problems associated with the dams. Near the dam facilities, North Park, Lee, and or Coventry can be flooded by overtopping of either the Lower Lake Dam or the Horseshoe Dam. So this occurs during significant rain events. That's close to home for you. But as we move downstream, the flows from the upper Doan Brook watershed, those flows that run through Horseshoe Lake and ultimately Lower Lake, come to this location. We're looking at University Circle. Now this is a picture of a major flooding event that occurred last March. 2-day rainfall, very severe, significant flooding in the University Circle area. This University Circle has had a history of some very significant acute flooding. And that flooding in this location is a threat to public safety. In terms of this building, evacuations occurred to remove people from the floodwaters. Similarly, inundated cars. There were rescues that occurred in the middle of the night to pull folks from rising floodwaters in University Circle. And then as we look downstream on Doan Brook's path to Lake Erie, this is MLK Drive. And flooding of MLK occurs on a fairly routine basis. It does not necessarily take a very intense big storm to cause this type of flooding, and that road needs to be closed in these conditions. So in terms of the history and the current conditions of these dams, both dams are out of compliance with the standards that the Ohio Department of Natural Resources set. ODNR is responsible for dam safety. They have a wing that is specifically responsible for flooding, specifically responsible for dam compliance. Horseshoe Lake, so both dams are out of compliance. Horseshoe Lake is in a much more acute situation. It is in an active failure mode, and that is why there's water seeping through this dam. That water and the movement of water has caused sinkholes and cracks in various concrete structures. And that is why the Ohio Department of Natural Resources ordered the draining of Horseshoe Lake. These are a few photos. Cracks in concrete, cracks in wall structures on dam facilities are indicative of subsurface movement. So once these cracks became evident, ODNR ordered the draining of the lake to mitigate risk. And that risk is a full dam breach, which would subsequently send water downstream. Now, under the district's regional stormwater management program, we have conducted very detailed, what we call stormwater master plans in all of the watersheds in our service area, including Doan Brook. The Lake Erie tributaries and Chagrin River master plan has been underway for a couple years, and we're going to be wrapping that study up this September. It's a $10 million effort, and this project is to look at the watersheds and the problems within the watersheds, whether they're erosion or flooding, and look for sources of problems and best solutions. To the left, so to the right is the Chagrin and Lake Erie Trib's service area or study area. To the left are what we call zones of inundation, a storm that might occur every 2 years. We have been able to plot what might be flooded by that type of rainfall event. Storm that occurs every 10 or 25 or 100 similarly. And this is in the University Circle area. And it does show inundation for most storms in the typical year and then beyond. So what does a stormwater master plan include? These are the typical tasks in those types of studies. And this is the first time we've done these detailed assessments of stormwater issues in Northeast Ohio on a comprehensive basis. So extensive field investigations start the process. We walk every inch of the regional stormwater system to look at current condition and note problems and/or opportunities for stormwater management. We have had extensive stakeholder discussion with our communities and other entities that have interest and involvement in Doan Brook as a whole. So we talk to them about the nature of their problems, the issues they are seeing. We're aware of some of the issues ourselves. We need to make sure that we are fully understanding and identifying problems so that we can develop needed solutions. We have a very comprehensive rainfall data collection program at the sewer district across our area. So we utilize those the rainfall data with stream flow to best understand what happens when it rains. Each time it rains today, if it rained tonight, how much rain fell, what was the response of the stream? We utilize computer modeling to simulate Doan Brook's performance during different rainfall events. For instance, if we had 4 inches of rain in 4 hours, we can simulate that in the model to see what happened with Doan Brook, what was inundated, what problems did we face. This all then leads to, for each problem, what are the alternatives to solve the problem? And we evaluate those alternatives with many factors: mitigation of risk, environmental factors, flood reduction, cost, benefit. And that leads us to the development of recommendations for each of these problem areas. And as we develop recommendations, they are discussed. That's what we're discussing tonight. And then we have to determine how can we prioritize solutions across the service area. To date, the master planning effort across 3 of the 4, we don't have the final numbers for the Lake Erie Tribs, but in the other 3 study areas, over $1 billion of stormwater management needs across our service area. So when we looked at Doan Brook, this is how we do it for each watershed. Once we get an idea of problems, we bracket those problems into problem areas. And in this watershed, we looked at 6 distinct water area problem areas, several of which were upstream of the lakes, flooding and/or erosion issues. Obviously, Horseshoe and Lower Lake were studied in great detail. The University Circle is that rectangle in the middle. And then MLK stretches from University Circle to the lake. And in each area, there are different types of stormwater management problems that exist, primarily erosion and flooding. So again, when we are looking at solutions, they have to be good for the environment and have to make, good for the safety aspects, mitigate risk, and also solve problems. There are significant flooding problems across our service area, and we need to devote our dollars to solving problems. And that's always in our mind as we evaluate alternatives and recommend solutions. This drills us over to the Horseshoe Lake and Lower Lake areas. This just gives you an idea of the drainage area and the lay of the land between these two lakes. Horseshoe Lake drains a much smaller area than the Lower Lake drainage area. It's about 1.8 square miles. And you can see that drainage area in the light highlighting. All of the flow from Horseshoe, Green, and Marshall, total of 4.8 square miles, drains to Lower Lake. And Lower Lake serves as a point of control for the discharge of stormwater downstream into University Circle and along Doan Brooks Path to Lake Erie. In terms of roles and responsibilities around dams, both of these dams, again, the Ohio Department of Natural Resources, a dam safety unit, assesses and enforces dam compliance across the state of Ohio. They do inspections, they note conditions, they cite deficiencies, and they order action. Both dams are out of compliance. In fact, 72% of the dams in Ohio have some compliance issue. And from a public risk and safety standpoint, that's not good. The communities, Shaker Heights, Cleveland Heights, are the ones that need to comply with ODNR's orders. And we're always working with the communities to try and help them accomplish that. The sewer district's role is to run a regional stormwater management program and solve stormwater problems. And so we have revenue that comes in annually that allows us to do certain construction or maintenance projects to help alleviate stormwater management issues, whether it's gross erosion problems, significant flooding problems, and other types of issues. So when we evaluated alternatives for both lakes, there were critical dam problems we knew had to be resolved. There was no question about it. That ODNR compliance order is out there and requires action. We're very concerned about risk of a total failure. So that's always in our mind, and we need to address flooding issues not only around the lakes, but downstream of the lakes with our regional stormwater dollars. So these are the findings of the master planning effort. At Lower Shaker Lake and that dam facility, we have determined that the flood control benefits that dam structure and lake provide to mitigate flooding near the lakes and downstream are notable. This is a Class 1 dam designation, and in the state of Ohio, there are different dam designations. Class 1 means there is a probable loss of life during a failure of that type of dam. Lower Shaker Lake covers a much larger area than Horseshoe. It does have significant available storage, and when I say storage, it means some room for flood flows coming from upstream to rise up and be stored stored to prevent downstream flooding. With any dam, there's a number of considerations that you have to keep track of. Obviously, the ODNR requirements are very rigid, very specific. We have our regional stormwater management program goals, and that's really solve problems, reduce flooding. Sediment in these lakes and in the stream system is a huge issue. I've been told that when the lakes were formed, at least Horseshoe, long ago, 25 feet deep. Horseshoe is 6 feet deep at its deepest point and silting in the upper reaches. So that's a significant sediment load that's been deposited in that lake over time. The costs are very enormous on dealing with the dam issues, and I'm going to show you those in just a moment. Management of lakes, management of dam structures require ongoing maintenance going forward. And that's not a small ticket. Sediment will continue to accumulate and have to be removed over time. So you're buying in a long-term maintenance requirement with any dam that you keep in operation. Design times for dam reconstruction or deconstruction are significant. We're going to talk about what those look like towards the end of the presentation. And obviously, stakeholder expectations are huge. And make no mistake, we are quite aware that there are different stakeholders that have different expectations for Doan Brook in general, the watershed, and the lakes and dams that are within. And we are quite aware of those expectations. At Horseshoe Lake, our findings determine that the flood control benefits near that lake and downstream are insignificant. It's still a class 1 dam, so that probable loss of life during total failure is a very real issue. And with that dam in an active failure mode, the risk at that facility should not be underestimated. So this lake controls a much smaller drainage area and sends its flows to Lower Lake. And again, we feel that Lower Lake, with its available storage and its location within the watershed, serves as the point of control, the best point of control for downstream flows. All those considerations I talked about in the previous slide hold as well. There are costs, requirements, stakeholder expectations that we need to consider as we make recommendations. So the recommendation that we are providing, and we talked to the joint session of council last night, Cleveland Heights and Shaker Heights, so we provided this recommendation to them as well. We're just at the point where this recommendation is fully baked from the master planning effort, and we wanted to get that word out to the community officials and to you tonight. There were a number of scenarios that were evaluated. There are different options, from no dams or lakes at both Horseshoe and Lower. And from a purely environmental standpoint, dams within streams are not good environmentally. Those dams were created for commerce. Commerce is gone. So they do harm stream systems. Some would say take them both out. And that was the lowest cost option. We did not choose that option because it was very clear to us that it was Lower Lake that was necessary to provide ancillary benefits, significant benefits towards flood reduction in the watershed. The second option, remove the dam. That eliminates the lake at Horseshoe, but we'll talk about the leave behind, the restoration, the stream restoration that will take place, that would take place under this option. And upgrade the dam and maintain the lake at Lower. And this is a $28.3 million option. And the district will fully fund this solution with its regional stormwater management dollars. We'll fund it because of the significant benefits that that Lower Lake can provide for flood mitigation. And we'll fund it to mitigate the risk that Horseshoe Lake is facing right now with respect to a potential total dam failure and the lack of benefits from a regional stormwater management perspective. And there were other combinations: keep one lake and dam, keep the other lake and dam, and you can see the cost, and they were larger costs. The district's ability to fund this project is solely around the removal of the dam at Horseshoe and the upgrade of the dam at Lower Lake. Options that maintain Horseshoe Lake as a structure going forward, that's not something the district's regional stormwater management program can fund because of the lack of benefit and the great need we have in other areas of our service area to solve flooding and erosion issues. And when we make this recommendation, we look at a number of things on the benefit side and the challenges from an environmental perspective and a safety perspective. So from an environmental perspective, removal of a dam along a stream segment is a good thing for stream function. And we think that's a big win, and we'll talk about what that improvement to stream function in the current footprint of Horseshoe Lake looks like. And then we maintain Lower Lake as a lake that also provides stormwater management function to us and benefit. From the safety side, this approach deals with the ODNR compliance issues. The district's recommendation for Lower Lake is to reconstruct that dam to fully meet current ODNR requirements. That helps us mitigate risk and bring that structure up to today's dam design standards. We also intend to remove a failing dam that presents a significant risk to the region. And again, we're dealing with risk and we're protecting assets as we do so. On the challenge side, I talked about it once, I'll talk about it again and probably a third time. Sediment is a big deal in both lakes, to be honest with you, particularly Horseshoe, and we need to make sure that we properly handle sediment as activities, construction activities continue so that we don't pass problems downstream. And we understand stakeholder expectations and need to make sure that we continue to discuss these options and leave behind for the community a really great community asset. From the safety side, this recommendation, the flood control aspects that Lower Lake can provide and that Horseshoe Lake lacks was a big factor in making our recommendation. And in fact, that helped us over taking both lakes out, and from a purely environmental standpoint, that's a better situation. We need flood protection on the regional basis across the watershed in Doan Brook, and Lower Lake provides us that. Again, stakeholder expectations are big. So this is a $28.3 million solution that the district would fund. Now I want to talk about Horseshoe Lake. Now this is its current condition. You take a look, you'll see two streams. This lake is fed by two branches of Doan Brook. One towards the top of the photo, the white line, and another one you can see it meandering in the middle towards the bottom. Two stream segments rolled through Horseshoe, and this is its current state, drained, sediment accumulating in certain areas. If you look to the upper reaches of the Horseshoe, those areas were once lake facilities and they have silted in long ago. Now our job would be to take those stream segments and re-meander them so that they're healthy stream segments going through this basin. So that potentially involves some meandering of the stream, certainly involves handling sediment, and definitely will involve replanting with native vegetation and trees to create a natural stream corridor, a good, healthy, riparian stream corridor in this facility, so that the mud flat that you see today in certain areas is not what is going to be left behind after this restoration. What we want to do is create a really good, sound community benefit, a community park-like setting that's much healthier and much better for the environment here. Now, we have done this in other locations, so it's too early. We haven't designed anything yet. But I want to show you some examples of when we say stream restoration, what we're talking about. This is Stickney Creek. This is in the city of Brooklyn near Ridge Road, and this is a fairly healthily beat up stream corridor. This is pre-construction activities. This is what this stream corridor looked like. We have recently done a project to restore this stream segment. This is midway through construction. You can see we have re-meandered the stream. They like sinuosity. We created some here. You can see the initial plantings that took place. And this is about a year later. This is what it looks like today. So we've created, essentially, we took what I'd have to call an eyesore and turn it into a really nice community amenity at this location. Now we have other examples. This is Stone Brook, closer to home. This is near the Art Museum. Very significant erosion, threatening structures at the Art Museum. Again, this is mid-construction. What we've done is lay the banks back, create some floodplain, some sinuosity, and these are the initial plantings. And this is what it looks like today. So again, we took a very beat up corridor and have created a very nice asset at this location. Now you have examples very close to home at the Nature Center, where you have a natural stream segment going through the Nature Center area. So our job is to create a leave behind and work with the community officials and the public to understand what opportunities stream restoration at the Horseshoe Lake Basin can present to us near term and into the future. So why the investment in Lower Lake Dam? It's really about the downstream flooding issue and the active storage and good regional stormwater management benefit that lake can provide and needs to provide to prevent acute flooding downstream. The Horseshoe Dam had insignificant flood control. So the district is hard pressed to invest regional stormwater management dollars into facilities that do not provide benefit. And with $1 billion of project needs across the service area, I think that would be a disservice on our part to invest in things that don't provide benefit. And the non-compliance issue at Horseshoe with ODNR is significant, and it's a risky proposition, and it needs to be addressed in the near term. Lower Lake, I just want to make sure people understand, Lower Lake is functioning, not in a failure mode. It has non-compliance issues. We need to bring up the design to today's standards, but there will be significant modifications of that dam structure as we go forward. And again, we will work with the community and the public to understand the changes that would need to take place at that facility as well. I want to talk about active storage a little bit. Most people think, well, certainly there's a lake and it's got to provide a stormwater management benefit. Well, lakes have a normal lake volume, and at these dam structures, Stone Brook is flowing into the lake all the time, and it's flowing out of the lake all the time. So the lakes establish a normal, what we call a pool, constant level. At certain facilities, there's not a lot of available capacity to accept wet weather flows, to store them before they're released downstream. That's what we call active storage. And the active storage capabilities of Lower Lake are much greater than Horseshoe. And the drainage area that it covers is much greater than Horseshoe. And the location that it exists in is good for regional stormwater management. So we are taking advantage of the active storage that exists, and we will see down the road, what modifications and what we can do to hopefully augment it going forward. I wanted to give folks some idea of our capabilities annually in terms of stormwater construction and the investments we've made over time. The annual stormwater construction budget for the Regional Stormwater Management Program is about $20 million a year. And we have a lot of issues and a lot of projects across our service area. So we have to properly stage our projects and cash flow so that we don't exceed our budget availability. Now, the estimated cost of the entire Shaker Lakes project, this is both Lower and Horseshoe, is $28.3 million. So we will have to certainly stage these projects so that we don't exceed cash flow, so that we're still providing services to other areas of our stormwater service area, but we want to get this process underway as soon as we can. In the last 6 years, and this is both on the stormwater and wastewater side, sewer district investment in the Donebrook watershed has been a little over $160 million in the last 6 years. And we're very happy to be working with our partners to make that investment. One of the largest chunks of the $160 million is what we call the Doan Valley Combined Sewer Overflow Storage Tunnel. There are combined sewers that overflow sewage in wet weather. I think it's about 350 million gallons a year go to Donebrook currently. We're going to turn that tunnel online in July. So from a water quality perspective, a significant reduction of combined sewer overflow discharge to Donebrook. But I want to make it clear that that investment does not solve stream flooding. It solves sewer flooding issues. And it will not, although there is some impact on the stream flow as we capture 350 million gallons, it's not going to solve the stormwater problems in Donebrook. This graphic shows you the general locations of where those investments have been made. All of the blue dots, the raindrops, are investment locations. And there's other things that we're not showing that are in addition to this, and we're working with partners like the Donebrook Watershed Partnership to enact and implement more solutions across the Donebrook watershed. And it's been a really great partnership. In terms of next steps, our recommendation would be to proceed with actions at Horseshoe Lake, given the critical risk factor that it poses, and release a request for proposal for the following services. Now when you take a dam down and you want to restore stream segments and you want to manage sediment, we're certainly going to need civil engineering services for that type of project. But this project really requires the expertise of landscape architecture and planning services, so that we work very hard on appropriate leave behinds. How are we going to restore this stream? How are we going to make this site a community asset? So landscape architects and planning type services will be heavily involved in the initial design activities. We know and have been involved in historic resource consultation in the past, and we'll be doing it again, and potential mitigation as necessary as we go forward. And really, tonight's meeting really starts the public engagement process in earnest. We'd like to move forward with this project. So there are other avenues as we move forward, certainly in this type of project, at the beginning, during, at the end, before construction, where we intend to work with Cleveland Heights, Shaker Heights officials, and the public to make sure everyone understands how the project is going, what opportunities exist for the leave behind for that community asset we'd like to create at Horseshoe Lake. So public engagement will be a staple of our process going forward. Now, I've been asked for schedule, and no one likes long schedules, and I know that. It took a while to study this. We have the data to support the recommendation, and we are talking, about a significant sum of money for investments that, are going to have a significant service life going forward. Depending on how things go, we'd like to issue this request for proposal in July or sometime this summer to get things going. We think with the engineering and architecture services and the public process, the initial phases, let's call it pre-design, that will select our alternatives. What's our best alternative at Horseshoe going forward? It's going to take up to about a year. And then we would move on to detailed design to complete that by the summer of 2023. That then allows us to get in position to bid the project. And right now it looks like 2024, very early, would be the earliest. Now, this is today's schedule. things change. We're wedded to the public process. We really want to make this work and meaningful. So we will see what our findings are, how quickly we can come to certain conclusions, options and opportunities. So this is today's schedule, and we will keep folks updated as we move along. Lower Lake would be the next investment, and we would follow a very similar process. Engineers and architects, planning folks for Lower Lake as well. We're going to have to stagger that approximately a year, and we'll firm that up. And we really have to watch our cash flow for the stormwater program. We only have so much that we can let in a given year. And so it will be depend on cash flow, but we do want to get Horseshoe moving, and then as a second phase, move towards the reconstruction of the Lower Lake Dam. So once again, environment and safety. We're always looking at environment and safety, and we want our regional stormwater management dollars to solve flooding and erosion problems and improve water quality. It's always been in the back of our mind, or in the front of our mind, So that's a lot of information. I'm more than happy to take questions. I think Jen is going to facilitate the questions. I see all kinds of questions in the chat and Q&A, and we'd be happy to take your questions.
All right, and thank you everyone for your great questions. I tried to answer as many as I could, and I could only type so quickly. But some of the answers are in there in the Q&A section under the answered option. Somebody wanted to know, Frank, if you could elaborate a little bit more about the stormwater master planning process, because specifically they're a little bit concerned that we're first doing detailed studies now when there have been problems out there for decades.
Well, you know, I appreciate that question. You're right. There has been problems out there for decades. And the district in 2013 launched a regional stormwater management program after a court case in Cuyahoga County Common Pleas, and we were overturned in September. So the program was down. We want to make a difference on these problems. So the program was down from 2013 through 16. Now, a Supreme Court ruling in 2015 allowed us to re-up the program, and we've been running in earnest ever since 2016. So I share your concern. There's been a lot of problems, legacy problems and new problems because of different types of rainfall patterns and events that we need to solve. So the master planning process was one of the first things that we did to best understand problems and best solutions so that our regional dollars provide maximum benefit to this region. Now, these are very detailed studies. The Lake Erie Tribs was a $10 million effort. So we're now at the stage where we have a really good handle on issues, problems, and priorities, and we can really continue to make a difference going forward.
Thank you, Frank. And the second question is related to the master planning process. So I figured it's a shorter question, but I would just throw it out there now. They would like to know that when we are modeling storm events, do we consider privately owned assets as well as city or publicly owned assets? They're specifically asking about detention systems, but I think we can just address overall assets.
Well, this is why we walk the system, and we've got a fairly healthy GIS system that tells us certain community assets. We've walked the stream and mapped the stream, and we delineate. We know land use in certain areas. So when it rains, depending on how much hard surface, impervious surface that exists, different runoff patterns can exist in different areas. So we're really careful about understanding the land use. Do we have a lot of trees, forested areas? Is it all pavement? And we do our engineering calculations to determine how much is going to run off in different areas. So it's a very detailed effort. So we try as best we can to thoroughly understand inputs to Doan Brook, storm sewer outfalls or whatever, so that as we simulate the stream, we've got the best simulation possible. We do back these up. We have to calibrate these models, and we use stream gauge data, actual event data, versus the model prediction to see how close we are in guesstimating, estimating what's going on in the system.
Thank you. And the next one is dealing with sediment management. And the question is, if Horseshoe Lake is gone, what will happen? Will the sediment just deposit in Lower Lake, or will it go elsewhere? And what will happen to it?
I'm going to take a quick stab at this. I'm going to ask Matt Jarver to elaborate. Sediment handling is a big issue, and there are different ways to handle sediment. And there are certain unknowns right now until we get into the design phase as to at Horseshoe, how much has to stay, how much has to go. But sediment management is a key issue. So Matt, I want you to add on a little bit your views on the sediment profile in these lakes.
Sure, Frank. So I'm Matt Sharver. I'm the Deputy Director of Watershed Programs at the district. Sediment is going to be a significant challenge on this project. We know that during the dam removal process, control of flow of water is also going to be another challenge. So anytime you're trying to control a stream while you're constructing around it, there's opportunities to lose sediment through erosion. We know that Horseshoe Lake is full of sediment, and a large amount of that sediment is going to have to be removed or at least maneuvered around to create the new stream corridors that Frank had discussed earlier, that the north and the south branch that flow into the upper ends of Horseshoe Lake. So it's going to take some really good engineering work to figure out the best way to do that. Once we get into that pre-design analysis, we'll understand that more. We've already done some field assessment on the type of sediment that we're looking to be dealing with to give us some insights into what we might be able to do with it on site or removal to a proper disposal facility.
Thank you. And Matt, while you're on, you may want to stay on for this one or pop back in. Somebody is just asking what the status is about the other 3 dams on Doan Brook. So I know we talked a little bit about Lower today, but I think they're referencing Green Lake and Marshall Lake dams.
Go ahead, Matt.
So the Green Lake Dam has been recently rehabilitated. So you can see that we've completed that work to rehabilitate the Green Lake Dam. It has a new spillway. We do have some videos, I believe, on our website, and through our stormwater construction story map, you can collect some more information specifically about that project. There's some pictures there and some costs associated with what we did there. We have not done any other work on Marshall Lake. We did do some minor work at Lower Lake to stabilize some of the dam there at Lower Lake.
I will say in the master plan, we did look at Green and Marshall. Is there anything we could do to improve stormwater management benefits downstream? And we did not find anything. We did not find anything. So we have no recommendations for actions at either facility.
All right, thank you. And Frank, I know you mentioned this briefly, but maybe you could just rephrase it because I can't type quickly enough to answer everyone's questions. But somebody would like to know again why Horseshoe Lake was emptied a couple of years ago.
This is a result of ODNR's, the Ohio Department of Natural Resources dam safety team's inspection of the facility and the notation of new problems, cracking and seepage. That indicates things are moving in the wrong direction. And it was that entity that ordered the lowering. First, it was a lowering, and then more issues started to crop up, and it was a draining. And the draining is done to mitigate risk of a total dam failure. You keep pressure on that dam with the seepage that's occurring, you're asking for trouble. And so they, to mitigate risk, ordered that lake drained.
Thank you. And Sarah would like to know if we can talk at all about possible contamination or toxins that might be in the sediment that's being dredged and how we would remediate that.
Matt may know more than I on this. I know we've done some core sampling to understand depths of sediment. I do believe we've taken a stab at, what's the sediment profile. I'm not exactly sure what we have found to date. But for any option that involves moving sediment or remaining or leaving sediment, moving it around, depending on that chemical composition, there's different things we would have to do. I don't know, Matt, if you have anything to add to that.
Yeah, Frank, so we have done some preliminary sampling. There are hydrocarbons, which is not a surprise being in an urban environment. But that material, what we've seen thus far, we'll need some more sampling to further confirm, but could be relocated from a proper landfill. It would not be able to be used in a residential setting, but could potentially be spoiled at commercial industrial facility, but likely would be headed towards a approved landfill facility.
And I'm sorry. Could we talk again just a little bit to provide a little bit of clarification as to why we are not starting with work at Lower Lake and why we're tackling Horseshoe Lake first?
Well, the issues at Lower Lake are, in terms of non-compliance, less egregious, less risky than what we've got at Horseshoe. The Horseshoe Lake, failure mode presents a significant risk, and we feel it's really important to address that risk sooner than later. We're getting a lot of spiky rainfall events. We had 2 very major rainfall events last year that caused a lot of flooding, destruction, damage, and debris across the service area, and those lakes will fill. So the more pressure we receive on failing dam faces, the more risky it gets. So we feel it's prudent to move quickly to mitigate that risk.
All right, and the next question deals with, I'll sort of rephrase this a little bit, but they would like to know a little bit about how we know that there's additional capacity at Lower Lake and how we're able to measure the amount of active storage that's in a water body.
This was all done in the master planning process. We have, dimensions, acreage, depths of lake. We run computer simulations to understand when rainfall, dry weather, what's the profile in that lake? And when it rains, what happens? How does the lake fill up, and how much is that available storage? And we compute those numbers through the computer simulations as we move forward. And Lower Lake just has a better footprint for storage to spread out. And so we made our calculations on available storage and determined that it was lower, that had the storage we needed, and it was at the right location.
Thank you, Frank. And everybody, thank you for your continued patience as I try to answer questions. Pop between the chat, the Q&A. If you do have questions for me, or actually for Frank, it does help me out if you are able to add them to the Q&A, just so that I have one less window open. Let's see, we talked about sediment. We talked about the other dams. A couple people keep asking me if they can have a copy of the Donebrook watershed map that we had in the presentation. So yes, you can absolutely have a copy of that. If you want to just send us an email to ask@neorsd.org, that would be wonderful. And that way I can take care of those answers for you. A lot of people would like to talk a little bit more about all of the stakeholders that we've been talking to, that we've been working on with this project as we've been going through the master planning process. So there's a lot of questions about stakeholders and who we've met with and how we plan to continue to engage stakeholders as we go through the design process.
Okay, as we were evaluating problems, looking for issues, there's a number of different key stakeholders that exist across the Donebrook watershed. And in the downstream reaches, you've got the cultural gardens, you've got the city of Cleveland, you've got University Circle Inc., all in those areas, and they're key stakeholders because they are affected by flooding issues. We've got the Friends of Lower Lake. we've engaged with them several times throughout this study. We have the Donebrook Watershed Partnership. We have the Shaker Lakes Nature Center. We have the communities as well. There are golf courses on certain areas of Donebrook, and we've engaged with them because the study is not just the lakes. The recommendation aren't just the lakes. We focus on the lakes today, but the problems are pervasive up and downstream. So we've identified those key stakeholders as we go forward. Our commitment moving forward is working with the communities to continue to engage the public and all of those stakeholders, because now we want to take an action and move forward. So we want to create great opportunities for the future at Horseshoe, do the right things at Lower. So we have to present, we've got to get to work and present those options and get direction, make sure people understand it. So our commitment at the sewer district as we move forward with our projects is to do that, to do just that early and often at the beginning, throughout the study phase, and certainly when we're getting ready with the recommended solution going to construction. We want to make sure people are well informed. And there's a lot of different ways to do that. Meetings like this, publications, other things. And we're going to work with the officials from both communities to really craft out a good, solid public engagement program going forward.
And thank you, Frank. And speaking of public engagement, but this is a follow-up to the stakeholder question. Andy would like to know how this project might impact the Nature Center and if it will increase the amount of flows running through Donebrook in that area.
Another great question, and we've been asked this multiple times. So the two key things for us, our master planning modeling suggested that today, even under today's condition, the amount of flow that comes into these lakes and then leaves in a rainfall event, they don't store very much, Horseshoe for sure. So what's coming in is already going downstream. Now, there is a change. When you take a dam out, it could change the hydraulics somewhat. We don't anticipate huge issues, but this is a key element of the pre-design step going forward. Managing sediment. We do not want to move sediment from the lake to the nature center. And we also want to make sure we thoroughly understand flow hydraulics down the corridor and through the nature center area. So that'll be a key element of the study, and we need to manage that effectively.
All right, and this is a question for our member communities, perhaps. But Frank, there are several questions in here asking about funding, asking for for a little bit of clarity on the $28.3 million that we are proposing today, as well as the cost to rebuild both the dams at Horseshoe Lake and Lower Lake. So I'm wondering if maybe you can just touch on the cost differences, talk about the Regional Stormwater Management Program and what we can do through the Regional Stormwater Management Program.
When we showed the options, and there were four, the recommended approach that the district can fully fund $28.3 million to get Lower Lake, maximize its storage capability, and get it compliant with ODNR standards, and then deconstruct the Horseshoe Dam to mitigate risk. There was no benefit from the flood control side, but we do see significant regional benefit in mitigating risk, removing that structure, and improving stream function in that section. So we can accept that and fully fund that. There was an option at $34 million to reconstruct both dam facilities, right? The district cannot fund the Horseshoe Lake portion of that. And that's a significant cost. It's 20 to 21 million because you are dealing with significant sediment and a significant dam upgrade. That's not something the district can support with district dollars. So the recommendation we made is really, we think, a package, the best package to move this forward. It's hard, we're hard pressed to invest $21 million and not affect downstream flooding, provide benefit. And there are a lot of other projects across this service area where the flooding is very acute. So we have to be very true to our regional stormwater management mission whenever we use funds to solve problems. So someone else would have to pick that up. The district could not support the Horseshoe Dam reconstruction.
Thank you. So I will move from Horseshoe for the next two questions. They both deal with lower. One is from Carl and one is from Brian, but I will merge them into one question. So they would like to know with the future work at Lower Lake, if dredging will be part of that solution, and if the dam at Lower Lake would be repaired or restored, or would it be a brand new dam?
I'm going to start and I'm going to ask Matt to finish. So ODNR has really pretty stringent requirements on what dams design wise need to do in terms of passing flow during flood flow events. And that dam is not compliant. So the look of that spillway and dam structure is going to change. And it's going to change significantly. So Matt, if you could walk through some of the key elements of that project and how you see that going forward.
In terms of the Lower Lake Dam, it will be a replacement. There'll be significant reconstruction of that dam. The principal spillway that you see there now will be much different, likely wider. There's a low point in Lower Lake Dam on the north end that needs to be addressed. That's where water escapes now during events, rain events, and floods onto North Park and Coventry. So that will need to be remediated. There's likely scenarios where we would look at types of walls at portions of the dam area. There'll need to be likely some armoring of the face of the dam for further protection, overtopping protection. So it's going to be a significant reconstruction of Lower Lake, which will again have to go through a process that will engage the public as we determine the best measures to put in place that are compliant with ODNR standards to make sure that they fit within the community. And I just wanted to add a note on the funding question. I know I saw a lot of questions in the chat about there's just a $6 million difference between the 34 million and the 28 million. But as we've commented, the district just cannot invest in that reconstruction of Horseshoe. The question I saw several times was, what about federal grants or financing of that? Unfortunately, there's just not much, if any, grant dollars available, federal and or state, for dam rehabilitation or dam replacement. In fact, last year, I think through FEMA, federal dollars that came into the state of Ohio for dam safety program rehabilitation was only around $500,000 statewide. So there's just not significant dollars available for this type of infrastructure rehabilitation, unfortunately.
All right, Frank, and there are a couple of comments which I will address because I cannot begin to talk about birds and answers, but you are our resident bird expert. So a lot of people want to talk about some of the birds, that the birds are enjoying the mud flats. Somebody wholeheartedly says keep the mud flats in the chat box. So maybe if you can just talk a little bit about biodiversity, the birds, and what dam removal means from an environmental perspective.
Yeah.
And I'll tackle a couple of other questions in the Q&A for people.
Okay, and I'm a big birder, so I get it. I understand it. And I continue to talk about stakeholder expectations. So in terms of that mud flat, certain people would probably like to see a mud flat for migrating shorebirds. And I understand that. And then there's a whole host of others that might not want to see that. I do think, irrespective of the mud flat, I think a restored stream, two stream channels through that facility, protection of riparian corridors, creates really great opportunities for bird habitat. It may not be shorebirds, it might be this, or it might be that. And you know, and I know that the Shaker Lakes are already a really great birding area. A great example of a restoration that's created an opportunity for birding sits at the Cleveland Lakefront Nature Preserve down at adjacent to Gordon Park and East 72nd. That used to be a mud flat. I remember the mud flat when they were pumping sediment in from the Cuyahoga River, and there were some great rare shorebirds that rolled through there while the mud was there. But that area has reverted much more natural. There's a lot of invasive, but that area has regrown and it's one of the premier birding spots in Northeast Ohio. So I see similarities to that could exist at Dome Brook.
Thank you, Frank. I knew you could tackle that one much better than I could. So there are a few questions. There were some in the Q&A very early on, and I apologize for not getting to them sooner, but there are some more recent ones. People saw the pictures in the presentation of the flooding in University Circle and the dates on it, where it was dated March of 2020. But some people are asking why that happened, if Horseshoe Lake had already been drained, and just a little bit of the reasoning why University Circle is flooding. So there's about 8 questions in the Q&A. I'm going to tag them all as answered live if you're able to address that. If we don't, for our listeners, if we don't address it to your satisfaction, just shoot me another comment in the Q&A and we will answer a specific question. Thank you.
Okay, that's a really good question. And that is a perfect example of why we do master plan, because we need to find out why is University Circle flooding, significantly flooding, and it's been flooding for a long time. You look at the Dome Brook handbook, you will see examples of floods way back, very significant floods. So it's had that history for a long time. Now, when we got into the study, one of the first things we did, I said we walked the system, but in University Circle, it goes from open stream to a closed culvert for a stretch, and then back to open stream as University Circle drains into MLK. Within that culverted stretch, we went and inspected to see what does that culvert look like. And what we found were 2 or 3 piles of rock debris that had been deposited likely for many years. And in one area was restricting a good 50%. It was a double culvert at that location. So we were losing 50% of the ability of that culvert to convey storm flows. So one of the first recommendations and steps we took down there is to remove that debris. And our analysis indicates with the debris, the level of service or the frequency of flooding that could occur in University Circle was at about a 2-year storm, 2 to 5 year, 2 year is what we think. So it was severely restricted. That causes things to back up and create flooding. And make no mistake, the March storms, and again on Labor Day, although there was really not acute flooding on Labor Day, but those March storms were significant and a wall of water came down to that culvert. We've removed that debris and we think we've improved that level of service up to about a 10-year storm. That's a huge jump going forward. So flooding anywhere is a combination of factors: the lay of the land, hydraulic conveyance capabilities, amount of flow coming from upstream, and or amount of good stormwater management that's occurring upstream. And so in each location, it can be a different circumstance, but certainly that debris was a problem. And there are some other problems with elevation and culvert size that we also have to overcome at some point.
All right, thank you very much. And somebody is asking if we have any idea of how wide or how deep Dome Brook would be once it's fully restored. And related to that question, somebody else would like to know if the brook would be accessible, if kids can, play in it, catch frogs, all that fun stuff that my kids definitely like to do in the water.
You mean in the horseshoe footprint, I think.
In the horseshoe footprint, yes.
Yeah, that's a design issue, and there is some fall. Matt can pile on this one too. That's one of the first things we've got to determine. How do we stabilize that stream and remeander it? There's a lot of elevation fall through there, so it's going to be a pretty extensive effort in determining how wide does that stream need to be? Can we create a floodplain? What are the side slopes? Things like that. And it's too early to tell on that. Matt, I don't know if you have anything that you could.
Yeah, that's a great question. And that's the reason for the detailed design and even the pre-design to start us on that path. Because again, it's going to be a challenge. As Frank mentioned, there's quite a bit of fall from the east, the west end of the current pool area, We're going to have to remove a lot of sediment to build that corridor, and we'll have to do it in a stable fashion. So we'll use our natural stream channel techniques to the best of our ability to create a stable channel. That channel will still have to adjust over time. The earlier question about the corridor between Horseshoe and the Nature Center, again, we'll have to take a good look at that area. It's quite stable now, but we know that it will likely have some adjustment that will occur to it as new flows that haven't been coming through it before come to it post-project. There'll be some sediment adjustment that will occur. We're not going to keep every drop of sediment from moving downstream. So it will be a challenge, but that's where we play off our prior practices and projects that we've accomplished to understand what we can do in this portion of Dome Brook. And I just wanted to add, there was a question about accessibility in terms of getting from one side to the other that you currently can now over the dam. When the dam's deconstructed, we do plan to provide access over the brook. So likely in a bridge, so that, you know, the typical pathway that you have now to access would be put back in some form or fashion that would be acceptable to the communities.
Thank you. And Matt, I'm going to keep you on the line because I don't know if we're able to answer this question, but I will read it verbatim. And if not, we can at least point Melissa in the right direction. So Melissa would like to know what became of the plan to remove at least one side of the constraints to Doan Brook as it passes through the cultural gardens to allow a more natural course of the brook and allow the brook to hold more water when needed. And how would that plan impact upstream plans?
I don't know the specifics of that plan. There's been several attempts in the past to try to add floodplain or address some of the failing walls along Doan Brook through the cultural gardens. We are also looking at that through the master plan. So we have a host of recommendations that will be coming out here in September that we'll be dialoguing with the city of Cleveland more about in Doan Brook Watershed Partnership. That's a tricky area because of the setting of the cultural gardens. There's not a lot of space there to create new floodplain. We've got Martin Luther King Jr. Boulevard right there as well. So we're going to continue to take a look at that to try to make the adjustments. We do have one project at Zielinski Park that Doan Brook Watershed Partners is taking on to address some of those failing walls and open up the channel for some floodplain capture. So we'll take it one step at a time there in that particular area.
Thank you. And actually I have a two-parter. I don't know, John, or if anybody from Friends of Lower Lake happens to be on this webinar. If you are, and you can just shoot me a note in the text. I have a question and I at least just need some contact information for somebody to get in touch with you. I don't want that person to think that I'm completely ignoring their question. So the questions that are coming through, there's a few dealing with Lower Lake Dam and some of the recent work that's been done at Lower Lake. I'm assuming the questioner is talking about the recent draining of Lower Lake, possibly for dam inspections or to when the stream gauge was lake gauge was reinstalled. But they would like to know a little bit more about the recent work that's been done at Lower Lake Dam. How does that work relate to this proposal? Thank you.
Matt, can you handle that one? There was some repairs undertaken, but in terms of how does that compare to the recommendations in the future work, it doesn't compare. I mean, we are talking about a wholesale reconstruction, a new dam structure. So it's more of a, you know, Band-Aid at this time. But the project that we have going forward or recommending is a much more detailed process to abandon the old structure and put in a new structure to meet today's standards.
Right. Some of the items that we're achieved under that previous project were more maintenance related, shoreline protection with some new rock that you see there at Lower Lake on the face of the dam, vegetation removal. Certainly you need to keep all woody vegetation from growing through the earthen embankment so you avoid seepage or sinkhole formation. But as Frank said, it'll be a complete reconstruction of Lower Lake Dam. That'll look much different than it does today. It'll still have a similar footprint, but it will look different due to the measures that will be put in place to make sure that that dam can convey the appropriate flows per ONR standards, which it does not do today.
And our next question is coming from Ruth and Martin, and they would like to know what role the city of Cleveland has played in this process, because the lakes on the property is owned by the city of Cleveland, and what approvals we may need from the city of Cleveland.
We have held initial discussions. I'm getting some feedback here. I don't know why, but we've held some initial discussions with City of Cleveland officials regarding, and it's true, they do own the land and there's a lease to the communities. And we'll continue to engage them. We've given them the snapshot of what these recommendations are. We will continue to engage them going forward. The lease, and I don't know the lease verbatim, but the intent was to preserve park-like settings in this area. So we'll continue to engage them going forward on elements related to the lease. They also have a very vested interest in what's happening with upstream stormwater management recommendations and construction, because it impacts them on the downstream end. So there's going to be continued engagement with City of Cleveland officials going forward.
Okay, and I have a question. It's just a general question. I didn't see anybody pop on from Friends of Lower Lake, but somebody, or actually, no, I'm sorry, this one's about Horseshoe Lake. I'll get back to Lower Lake in a minute. But they would like somebody from either Shaker Heights or Cleveland Heights, if you can talk a little bit more about the history of Horseshoe Lake. I know that there's tons of information online, but if there's anybody here that can address that general question. If not, I will happily send this questioner some online resources.
Well, you know, there was just a webinar that I attended. It was in the evening, and it was about the history of Lower Lake. And it was a fantastic webinar. It really went into detail about a lot of things related to the history, you know, from the initial formation of those dams and the lakes, and then things that happened over time. So there is a webinar. I assume it's available. I don't know how to get it. We do have, there's Elizabeth Smith. If you email Elizabeth Smith at the Donebrook Watershed Partnership, she can handle that for you. But that was a fantastic look into the history of that lake.
Jen, if I could also add, just for those that may not be aware, the Shaker Historical Society is located immediately adjacent to Horseshoe Lake as well. And so they have all kinds of great information, historical information and records so that you can tap into. So I just wanted to make sure people who might not be aware of that, it's literally right across the street from the Horseshoe Lake Dam.
Thank you, Mayor Weiss. I do appreciate that assistance on that question. Frank, Pat would like to know, how do you go about removing a dam?
That's a great question. We're going to find out. You know, there's not a lot of, there have been dam removals, particularly along the Cuyahoga River. And you have to engineer it so that as you are removing the dam structure, the dam face and concrete needs to come down. So you have to notch it in certain fashions to eliminate that old spillway. You have to be really careful how you do this so that you don't create, you know, a catastrophic situation, and you effectively manage both sediment and flow. Now, along the Cuyahoga River, and the Cuyahoga River is different than a lake, but there are similarities. Sediment management needed to really get nailed, and flow management had to really get nailed, because when the contractors are in, they're really, it's the wet weather conditions and high flows can cause issues. So they have to properly stage step down removals so that slowly and in stages, concrete structures are removed, the area is opened up, and we manage sediment appropriately. So that is the crux of the pre-design effort, is to learn exactly for this specific dam what steps would need to be taken. And that's information we would be sharing as we go forward.
All right, and I do have another question, I believe for Shaker Heights for Patty Spees, who I know is on the line. And this may be for Colette Klingsdale, because I believe this is on the Cleveland Heights side. But Beth would like to know if there are any plans to build up the area of Coventry and North Park, because it is much lower than the rest of the land in the area, and they are wondering if that's why there are flooding issues. I don't know, Patty or Colette, if either of you are able to answer that, but that would be a big help for me. Thank you.
I am not certain that Colette, she had difficulties, and I think she cannot unmute to speak. That's my understanding.
That's right. I will be sure, Beth, I will be sure to get that question over to Cleveland Heights for you. And if you are able to send me a note, either in the Q&A or in the chat, just with your email address, I will have somebody follow up with you on that one. And then Bill would like to know if we can talk a little bit more about the flooding that's taken place in the area over the last 50 years, just sort of the, perhaps he didn't elaborate much more than that, but maybe we can talk a little bit about some of the problem spots and some of the issues that we've seen increasing over the years.
Well, I can start, and I don't have the actual dates of overtopping of either Lower or Horseshoe, and we can dig those out. And overtopping events can flood roads in and around that vicinity. There's a much more historic record of University Circle flooding. And I point you to the Donebrook Handbook, a publication that really summarized a lot of the issues along in the Donebrook watershed over the years. And in my read of that, we've had some very significant flooding in University Circle in the past few years. We had a big time event in 2020. And there are historical records dating back to the 70s, 60s, and 50s of University Circle during big rain events having significant inundation. And we can look to that record, but that record exists, and primarily there. I mean, that's where the pinch point is. All of the flows from the upper watershed get to that location and then flatten out on their way to Lake Erie. So there has been a very acute flooding in that area. It's not a one-time thing. It's not just a 2020 phenomenon. It's been happening for years, decades.
And then the next question, it deals with future construction at Lower Lake. And Don would like to know how long Lower Lake would have to be drained to potentially do dam repairs and replacements at Lower Lake.
Tough question to answer right now. It's really tough right now. We really have to get more design details to determine. It really gets into a matter of how much sediment do we have to remove and how much, let's just say, concrete structure has to be installed, cured, and put in place. So these are the things. I hesitate to give you construction duration for either Horseshoe or Lower until we have construction details, but that certainly will be something that comes out of our design process and will come out of our public engagement process, so we all understand the steps that will need to be taken in that time frame to implement projects.
And Frank, Chad would like to know what the expected lifespan is of this work that we are proposing.
Another great question. You know, I would say heavy civil works like this, you know, when we install large interceptor sewers, for instance, we're looking at close to 100-year life. You know, we would expect a very significant long life. I will ask that question of our design team, but we got good life out of the Shakers construction. And I'm surprised, to be honest with you. It's either by, good design or by chance, but typically in a large concrete civil structure like that, I would expect significantly long life. That's not to say that as things evolve, you will see spot repairs that might need to be taken, some erosion in and around the dam. That's why dam inspections happen periodically, to identify those issues and move on, keep those things functioning.
And somebody would like to know, so this is a question possibly for Mayor Weiss or somebody else at Shaker Heights. But the question is, could the park at Horseshoe Lake, so Horseshoe Lake Park, be declared a land conservancy trust to prevent development?
I don't know, Mayor, if you want to take a stab. And again, that gets into the lease, right? And the uses for that park, and it may already be in place. We'd really have to take a look at that, the deed and the lease agreement to understand that. But my impression is that, it was to remain a park-like setting.
Yeah, it's a good question, and I don't know the answer, so I'm not going to take a stab at answering it without being accurate in it, but it's certainly something we can look at. But yes, I mean, generally, for those that may not be aware, these park areas are actually owned by the city of Cleveland and leased to Shaker Heights and Cleveland Heights, and we have the obligation to maintain it and use it for parkland. How that technically ties into conservancy, more modern kinds of concepts for conservancy, I can't tell you. I know that I don't have that expertise, but certainly something that we can look into.
Thank you very much. Somebody would like to know if one of the options we considered was keeping the Horseshoe Lake footprint as a controlled mudflat or wetland.
We looked for a short while at could you create a more wetland type of arrangement, not necessarily class 1 dam arrangement, and have staged control in that facility. And that was rejected after some discussion and looking into, because it got to be a very complex and very costly strategy. And again, the amount of water and level of control at Horseshoe is not what's controlling the flooding issues that exist certainly downstream of the lakes. And it was clear that it was the lower lake situation that provided that maximum benefit. So the alternatives really revolved around lower and maximizing its flood control and removing risk associated with Horseshoe. So we did not see significant benefit there as well.
Thank you. And then jumping back to some of our stormwater projects versus Project Clean Lake projects, there are a couple of questions in the Q&A dealing with questions about the investment in the Doan Valley Storage Tunnel, as well as some of the stormwater investments and other investments in both Shaker and Doan Brook. So I'm wondering if, Frank, if you or Matt or anybody else from the district can talk a little bit about the different investments that we've made throughout the entire watershed.
I'll take a stab first on the combined sewer overflow side. As I stated earlier, this is a big project, well over $100 million to significantly reduce combined sewer overflow discharges to Doan Brook. And that project's been underway for a while, under construction. It's going to wrap up, and we're going to turn that tunnel on, and that'll be good for water quality. Even before that, and this is a while back, other facilities were built in and around Doan Brook to help alleviate basement flooding in those communities. Shaker Heights, Cleveland Heights, the Heights Hilltop Interceptor, that was another large-scale district investment that was made, with completion in the early 2000 timeframe. We are partnering with other entities, the Donebrook Watershed Partnership and others, co-funding. They are receiving certain grants to do like Sawinski Park, and we are helping, providing additional funds on that. Good for Donebrook, good projects environmentally. And Matt, I don't know if you have others to add on top of that. We could provide a comprehensive summary of each and every, on the map that we showed with the raindrops, I would be happy to, elaborate on each and every one of those going forward, if that information would be helpful to the questioner.
Right. And again, you can visit our website and go to our stormwater story map page and see our projects that are in the Donebrook watershed. But the Cleveland Museum of Art is probably the largest stream restoration project out of the regional stormwater management program that we've accomplished. We did do a restoration project at Rockefeller Park, adjacent to the lagoon, more of a hard armoring project there to stabilize the failing slope. We don't always get to use all of our natural channel capabilities due to constraints along the corridor, but those are two restoration projects. We also have the green infrastructure project at Fairhill and MLK, which is part of the combined sewer overflow control at Ambler Park. So that facility is there. So we have a number of different types of projects throughout Donebrook that we're trying to make a water quality impact improvement.
There are a couple of people just looking for clarification, Frank, on the upcoming schedule that you had at the end of the presentation. So sort of what our next steps are, and we can add in there how public engagement will take part, will be a part of that whole entire process. Oh, Frank, you're muted. I don't know how you got muted.
There. Okay,
Thank
sorry.
you.
We had a slide in the presentation, and I'll paraphrase that slide. The next step for us would be to issue a request for proposal for the initial design stage of the Horseshoe Lake work. That would be to understand, the question was, how do you decommission a dam? We'll understand that. That's one of the key tasks. How do we manage flow and sediment going downstream and at that facility? And landscape architecture planning assistance. How do we make the leave behind, the stream restoration, great for the community? So these are the services that we will undertake under that request for proposal. We will include and do include a healthy and public engagement process so the public, community officials understand the steps we are taking, the options we're looking at, and the direction we'd like to take. And we want to have a good engagement, good discussion, because there's different avenues, potentially different approaches we can make around that stream restoration component. And we want to be cognizant of needs to really stabilize the stream and get a good look, and then potential future opportunities to add on, at the community level. So the public engagement process will occur throughout that. And then we move to, that's about a year process. Now it could be shorter, it depends on, findings and discussions in the public process. Once we understand direction and have pretty good agreement on it, then we get into the guts of what we call detailed design. And that we're guessing about a year roughly to complete the detailed design, to really firm up the recommendations and develop the plans and specifications we'll need to bid the project. So that bidding, hopefully we're going to get the bidding process underway later in 2023 and be able to award that construction contract and get going in early 24. Now, this is today's schedule. It is subject to change, and our job is to keep people informed on, when activities are going to be taking place and, the public engagement opportunities that we're going to be offering.
And somebody would like to know if we are aware of the historic cherry tree grove that is near the lakes, and what, if any, plans we have to protect that during construction.
We are aware of the cherry grove, and it is my understanding, I've had some discussions with staff, that that area can and will be protected. our construction activities will not necessarily center on that location. And we'll keep those folks well aware of the Cherry Grove and any issues there. We don't anticipate any. And then opportunities down the road.
Thank you. And there were a couple of questions. There was one in the chat and one in the Q&A, just again asking more questions about flood control and how lakes play into that. Just so that everybody does know, I did put a few quick paragraphs in there if that helps. But if you're better off listening to Frank, I can have him address that again. So basically, Frank, there are still continue to be questions dealing with how we are able to manage stormwater if there's no lake. And in my comments, I did touch on the floodplain issue, just very basically.
Well, the management, when we remove Horseshoe Lake, a couple things happen, right? The streams are remeandered and potentially some floodplain created. That can slow flows down in smaller events, but certainly in a big event, the flows are going to come downstream. Now, Lower Lake, through our master planning process, we identified available storage that helps mitigate those flows. Those flows are coming today. I don't see a significant change in the amount of flow that's going to come out of Horseshoe as opposed to today's condition tomorrow. But we really need to look at that. And because of its location, covering that entire upper watershed and available storage, the ability of that lake to rise up during a storm event and start to store flow before sending it all downstream is important. And we have it and we want to maximize it going forward. So it's Lower Lake that serves as that point of control.
All right, Frank, and I think I've got time for just about 2 more questions. And I'm going through them. If by any chance, for those of you who are still on, if I missed your question, please send an email to ask@neorsd.org, and we will route that to the right person for answers. So I'm not intentionally skipping anybody. I honestly skipping anybody. So if you can send an email to askus@neorsd.org, that would be great. Frank, there is a question about the current pedestrian use of the spillway at Horseshoe Lake for pedestrian access to cross from North Park to South Park, and they would like to know if access will be still considered as part of this project.
Well, it will be, and I think Matt addressed that question earlier, so let's get him back. But yeah, we realize that today there is going to be a different look, but that access needs to be maintained. And Matt, if you could elaborate on that.
Right, that's a great question, and we have considered that in our initial discussions and our planning here. So we plan to ensure that there'll be access over Doan Brook, and it will likely be a bridge span of some sort, and the district will incorporate that into our project to make sure that there's adequate access from one side to the other of the park facility.
All right, and then this question has come up a couple of times. Somebody would like to know how ratepayer funds are being used to fund this project. They're asking specifically about projected costs, but I'm thinking that they're referencing how we plan to use our funding means for the $28.3 million that we're proposing.
Okay, that's a good question. Now we have an impervious area fee that is used to collect stormwater revenue to facilitate design and construction efforts, ongoing maintenance efforts, coordination, collaboration, technical service to communities, all stormwater management related. We set an annual budget on how much are we going to provide for maintenance, how much will we provide for design and construction activities. Now, for construction related activities, typically within our revenue picture, it's about $20 million per year. So we use the collective revenue from all of the ratepayers. This is truly a regional approach. So today the investments could be in the Doan Brook watershed. There are plenty of other issues and opportunities in Big Creek. Every stream across the service area has problems and issues, and we need to effectively prioritize our investments to solve problems. So everyone's paying into this, and we are trying to do worst first repairs to upgrade level of service. There are people that are flooding, stormwater related flooding, in less than a 1-year storm. There, it's repetitive on an annual basis. And we've got to move that needle up so that their frequency of flooding is much less than it is today. So we use that revenue, we budget annually, we prioritize the construction program, we reprioritize annually as well. And then we establish those projects that are going to go into design and construction, and they all have to fit within that available money we have on an annual basis. And that's how it will work here. All users, will pay for the improvements at Doan Brook, just like all users are paying for other regional projects across the service area.
All right, Frank, and I am just checking one more time to see if there's anything that I missed at the very end. We'll do one more. They are wondering if we have considered any green infrastructure elements as part of this project.
Well, that gets into landscape architecture, and we'll see. We're always considering green infrastructure add-ons. We do have a green infrastructure grant program in certain locations, right, to help further reduce combined sewer overflows. We are always looking for natural solutions that could involve green infrastructure or green practices. When you take, a stream corridor and remeander, stabilize, replant, revegetate, that's a fairly healthy green alternative. We really want to stay away from hard armors, banks, concrete, mortar, steel when we can. It doesn't always happen, but most of the time we can do things in a much more natural setting. So I think that's pretty green as we go forward.
All right, thank you again. And for everyone, thank you very, very much for joining us tonight. As I mentioned, if I missed your question, I am very, very sorry, but please send additional questions to askus@neorsd.org. And our customer service department will see them, and they will direct them to the right person here at the district to handle that question for you. I wouldn't be doing my job if I did not also say that we do have cost saving programs that are available for both our wastewater and our stormwater customers. If you would like more information about those, you can visit us online at neorsd.org/save for information about those, including our summer sprinkling program, which it was so hot last week. I'm sure we all used a lot of water to water our gardens. So with that, if you need anything else, please send us an email, and thank you again for joining us. Take care.
Jen?
Yes, sir.
I just wanted to add 2 more comments before we signed
Absolutely.
off. I was just following the chat, and I just noticed that I don't think we addressed any questions regarding the historic preservation. So we are aware through our previous projects at Green Lake and Lower Lake of the preservation or the historic preservation aspects of each location, including Horseshoe. So we'll continue to work with the appropriate entities and the communities to ensure that we avoid any adverse impacts. And if we do incur any adverse impacts, that they're appropriately mitigated. So there'll be a process to go through for that. And then lastly, I just noticed several more questions on the funding aspect. Again, just wanted to reiterate that the difference between the district's recommendation of 28.3 for the removal of Horseshoe and the reconstruction of Lower is different from the 34 million to replace both dams. Again, the district, because of the regional nature of the project of the program, can't commit that what would be about $20 million worth of investment for the reconstruction of Horseshoe, which includes the sediment removal. So it's not necessarily a $6 million difference between the options. It's a $20 million project that would need to occur to reconstruct Horseshoe. Because of the reconstruction of the dam itself and the cost of the sediment removal to, 1, reconstruct the dam, and 2, to create a lake that would be in a healthy setting. So there's a significant amount of sediment that would have to be removed at a great cost that raises that cost to $20 million. So it's not a $6 million difference between the two options. So I just wanted to add some more clarity to that as I saw some continued questions about that. Thanks, Jen.
Absolutely. Thank you again, everyone. We did record this presentation, so you can reference it to friends, anyone else that might have questions. You can send them there. That can be accessed at neorsd.org/Shaker Lakes. Again, thank you very much for joining us, and we will see you at our next public engagement meeting. Thank you.